Alistair,
Yeah.
the first question is the state of contemporary dance. How did we arrive here today with contemporary dance? Could you just give us a brief history of?
I'm glad you asked me that question.
Just a brief one.
Okay. So can we have the first slide? So just to be sure, I'm talking now about the contemporary dance world, right? So we know there are many other worlds, and ballet is one of the biggest ones, of course, and there's other world dancing, you know, with Kathak and African dance, all that stuff. Let's think about Western contemporary dance just for a minute, if we may. And so the three people up here on the screen were the three major influences from the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and including Martha Graham there on my left, who really was the inventor of contemporary dance. I mean, some may disagree, but it sort of began with her, and it was a reaction against ballet. Definitely, it was definitely like anti-ballet. So let's just go back to the floor. Let's not pretend we're fairies. Let's get real and have this other relationship with our gravity. And it was really and it was very strong woman, and much of the work was based on that. Then we have Merce Cunningham, who actually danced with Martha Graham, and then went on to also then produce his own dance technique. So there's a Graham technique, which did you ever study? Yeah, it's painful.
Very.
Did you ever get over it? Yeah. Cunningham then also invented his own style and method, which people still learn now. But then went on and did something much more radical, working with a composer where they had no relationship. There's no relationship with dance and music, all of that stuff. So much more radical going into the 70s, 80s. And he only died a couple of years ago. And so this is all in America. Of course, where it really began. But at the same time, or a little bit later, over in a place called Wuppertal, someone called Pina Bausch started to create the most extraordinary radical work. She died most recently. In fact, they're all dead now. Why am I showing you these three people? Because that was a time, in a way, and you're talking about generations, where there were giants. And I think it's true that that's also the case maybe in the visual arts. You know, the giants, there were Pollock, there were people who were really who stood out. And something else happened after that. So next slide. So, yeah, we said we'd come back to Michael Jackson. And these people here, the Rocksteady crew. A Rocksteady crew were making dance and music in the 1970s, actually at the same time as Pina Bausch was making her radical work over in Wuppertal. It's quite different worlds. But it was really the beginning of hip-hop in the Bronx. And of course, we know Michael Jackson. Now, when these two things came along, that changed everything. And it changed you, didn't it? I know you're not meant to be answering questions, but it did, didn't it? It changed your whole life. You saw what he did, and you tried to mimic that, and it influenced you. And at the same time, we had MTV, and then, of course, we had the internet and YouTube. And all of those things have completely changed the landscape. So that now there aren't the giants anymore. Of course, they have a huge influence, and Pina Bausch has influenced you, I'm sure. As Cunningham and Graham in a way. But now there are many, many voices. So if we look at the next slide, we have a picture here that shows 4 of the associate artists. So we have 16 associate artists, and here are 4. And it just shows a sort of diversity of what they do. So we have obviously Akram working with this source of Kathak, Sidi Larbi, who's standing on his head here, who you saw working with Akram. He started doing he was a disco dancer.
Yeah, hip hop, and he did a lot of street dance.
And so, totally different. So didn't train in Graham or anything, but then went into doing what he's doing. Hawth Theatre, who started in Israel with Bathsheba in a particular style, but has created this more urban style, which is, so if you go to a Hawth Theatre performance, it's more like going to a gig. And then finally, Kate Prince, who has made a real name for herself as a hip-hop choreographer, taking hip-hop into theatrical situations. But the influence of hip-hop is extraordinary, and it will keep going, and it will become the main thing. I think it will be really huge. I think it's... And the reason I say that is because if you think about the history of ballet, for example, it was started by Louis XIV, nobleman, and created these rules about movement. So it started with the nobility and gradually filtered down over the years, centuries, to the people. And what's happening with hip-hop is exactly the opposite thing. And it starts on the street with people from all backgrounds who are just sharing this art form. And there's something very empowering about that. And you can see it in the movement, don't you think? When you see a hip-hop dancer, they own the material. And it's a very different quality.
Because it originates from them.
It does.
It's their knowledge, yeah. Okay. Second question. I wanted to ask you, it could be quite personal, but I've been wanting to ask this to a lot of presenters and artistic directors of theatres. Are there rules of what is it to be a producer? And what are the rules? Okay. Because collaboration for me is, we're celebrating collaboration, but there are dangers with collaboration, because suddenly, perhaps there are dangers, especially if we have different rules.
Yeah.
And where are the boundaries? When does a choreographer stop being a choreographer? When does a producer stop being a producer?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you asked me that question. Because it did, it prompts me to think about, and this is only my approach in a way, but I thought about the qualities that you need to do what I do, and I listed them. Actually, there's three main ones, right? Loyalty is the first. So,
sorry, you're talking about yourself?
Yeah.
I'm joking. Go on.
So my approach is to pick the right ones, like you, and then stick with you. Stick with people right through the bad and the good, and the bad and then the good. Because I think that's one of the things which, is really needed in this profession. Because I remember talking to you about this. You have to look at your career in an arc, and you have to think when you're going to be 50, what are you doing? And so I really believe that. So the 16 associate artists, we've had this over. It's been 12 years now. We've had that scheme, and only one person has left, and that was Sylvie Guillaume, because she retired. So loyalty is one thing. Optimism, because I was thinking, really, you have to be so optimistic to be in this business and be a producer. And I have to say, after it's nearly 30 years of doing this stuff, when I go to any theatre and the curtain goes up, I'm thinking, wow, really, this is going to be amazing, And of course, many times it isn't. But I've got this enthusiasm. My wife says it to me. She says, "You're like an enthusiast," and I think that's also a quality. You have to have an enthusiasm about it and an optimism, because and often artists will go through doubts about the work. And not be sure, and you have to be optimistic for them, in a way. Third thing is stamina. Just keep going, because it's relentless in that sense. So those three qualities. Can
I just quickly say, sorry?
Yeah.
There's a fourth one for me, with you particularly, it's a bit like a Yoda from Star Wars. Do you know Yoda?
Yeah, I know Yoda, yeah.
Very wise. There's something, what's interesting for me about a producer is, which we are losing as a civilization, is the act of listening. And you're a great listener. So it's very easy, it's very possible to interact with you and to have that sense of confidence and that sense of guidance, because you listen to what's being said before you respond. And that for me is a great quality.
Thank you. And the other thing I'd say is that, and you've probably experienced this, I'm not the sort of producer that comes into the studio and, should we say, interferes. And I think that's just my style, and some people would disagree with that. But I think it's you're either in for the whole process, so you go into the studio and you're part of the thing, or you're not, right? But if you're invited in to say, okay, just give me which you have on occasions, what's your reaction to this thing? Then fine. But I have seen people who get too involved in that process, and I tell you why it's not right. It's because it is a process. Okay. And I think I always remember this moment when Anthony Gormley was working with Sidi Larbi on this piece, actually, with it's called Sutra. It's coming back next year, by the way. It's 10th anniversary. It was Anthony was quite involved in the process because he created these boxes. It was a piece with 22 Shaolin monks, and he created a box for each of them. And then Larbi had a silver box of his own, special executive club box. And so they were creating all these scenes with these boxes, and it was causing, they were getting splinters and they were moving them around, and it was very laborious. And one day, Larbi just cut a whole scene, and Anthony was like, "Why have you? Why that? I loved that scene. Why? How could you do that? He was really upset and angry." And Larbi said, because it may come back, but at this moment in time, it has to go, and that's
part of his process.
Yeah, and that's why I have that attitude because you are in it every day, and of course you've asked me to come in and say. I remember when I went in to see 0 Degrees, and you did this. I thought, oh God, we've got a hit. But that was it. It was just to say, yeah, keep going. It's not to. Do you see what I mean?
No, because it's the same thing with collaborators, but with producers, it's I think in different genres, producers play a slightly different role. I think in musicals, they are hugely involved artistically.
Yeah.
And I find that interesting and also complex.
Yeah, but you see, the commercial world is slightly different because, I was just talking to, I hope this isn't indiscreet, but I was talking to the guy that's directing Bat Out of Hell for the Colosseum. It's the Meatloaf musical. He's a really nice guy, actually, and very talented, so I hope it's going to be great. But he's got 4 American producers, all, every day has to, they all have an opinion. He says it's like having 4 chefs, in a room, plus him. And so, because there's so much at stake, and everyone has an opinion. But in our world, it's different because I think the process is like king or queen in it. So
so in a sense, the commercial world, of course, is driven by the final outcome is money.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. Driven by money. Sorry.
Yeah, it is.
And in our world,
So you've got one last question.
One more question, very quickly. Where do you feel contemporary dance is going, and also where is Sadler's Wells going with contemporary dance into the future?
Okay, so I think I answered partly by saying that the hip hop is the future in a way. I mean, it's not the whole story, but I think it's something which is just really going to become something, and already has. So in that light, we're involved in a project, and it is the next stage for Sadler's Wells. We're going to create a 500-seat studio theatre in Stratford, where the Olympic Games were, and along with 6 studios. And we're going to open a hip-hop academy there so people can go and study hip-hop, and in the same way as they could in the Ballet Conservatoire. And we're going to have a choreographic school so that we can make the next Akram.
How are we doing for time?
I think we're done.
Yeah.